and hopefully that will help.
And is our presentation available?
Yeah, our presentation.
Real quick, I meant to do this earlier while Ed is fumbling around. Let me just get, we've got some folks from the audience
I thought I
here.
saw us here. Oh, here we are.
This is the Arlington way at work.
That was the other.
And I'd like to get somebody to do it.
I sure can.
Okay, I know you want to be our counter. I'm just so we can get a rough assessment. How many who are here feel right now that Arlington should keep the status quo and not change existing zoning ordinances to allow hens? Can you stand up or raise your hand so we can get a count? This is no hands, raise your hand.
This is lovely.
Okay. Five? Okay. And then how many are here who feel the other way, that we should allow hens in Arlington? Okay, we got a count there. And then I'll give you a third option of, you haven't made up your mind, you're neutral, you don't want to, you don't want to go public yet. Okay, so what are we saying? 20? 20 for pro. 20 for pro. Okay, and how many don't know or won't say? Okay. 10, okay, 10 have that middle ground that don't know or won't say. Okay, great.
Okay, well, thank you for that, John. And so I think Jefferson and I are going to leave now because I think the only thing I could do is make it worse. So thank you. Okay. No, thanks, everybody. And I hope folks, I especially appreciate the folks who may have an open mind on this and came here for information. Again, that's the way we do things in Arlington, so thank you for that. So I think I've got an auto clicker, Jefferson, so let's see if it works. Did you do that? Oh. Okay. Okay, so the Arlington Egg Project is a group of your fellow residents. We are volunteers. We are doing this because we care about our community and we want a conversation. And as much as we are having a conversation as a community now and as part of this urban agriculture process about backyard hens, we are very appreciative. That is our interim goal. Our ultimate goal being changes in the zoning ordinance to allow we Arlington residents to keep small numbers of backyard hens while banning roosters and having provisions to ensure the secure, safe, and proper keeping of hens. More than 1,000 of us have added our name to our petition. If you want to become the 1,114th, add your name to the petition copy that we have outside. You can also go to Arlington Egg Project to learn more about us. So here's the points that Jefferson and I want to make in sum. One is that there is a lot of benefits to small numbers of backyard hens in urban areas. Point number two is that traditionally we Arlingtonians could do this, and traditionally we Americans could do this, that is, keep small number of backyard hens. And then finally, and this is perhaps most relevant to the fact that we are having a community as a conversation and we've got a good group of our fellow residents investigating this issue, is that Jefferson and I want you to understand, and we want to show you evidence and case studies of the fact that this is better done legal and regulated than illegal and unregulated. So the other side would have it that there is something intrinsically and impossibly something intrinsic about backyard hens such that the benefits cannot be realized without undue problems, and we would like to show that not only isn't that the case, but we have lots of case studies to show otherwise. So, benefits. Who's had a backyard egg? Anybody? Who's had a backyard egg? And? How was it? Delicious? Depends what you feed it. Okay. Backyard eggs, farm eggs, what do you want to call it? Okay. Tasty, huh? Right? So they taste good. Michael Pollan, you all may have, some of us may have read Michael Pollan's books. He talks about the fact that backyard hens can eat what they want to eat. They're omnivores. Their natural diet does include insects, which means insect control, but also a diversified diet for the hen. Live greens means chlorophyll. That's what gives backyard hens the very deep, rich orange color, at least according to Michael Pollan. They're more nutritious, and so studies consistently support this, that a happy hen in your backyard will produce eggs that are healthier for you. Intuitively makes sense, but the studies support that. And this is one of the big reasons, is because the hen keeper is in control. You know what you are feeding your hens. You are helping them to eat that diversified, healthful diet. They will thank you in return. So we get our food from somewhere. Some kids and some adults may think it comes wrapped in cellophane or styrofoam. It doesn't. And here's a couple places we can get food. Here's one. Here's a backyard hen coop. Here is a industrial scale facility not far from here, actually, in West Virginia. And if you are a hen, you can guess which one you prefer to live in. But again, this is not only an issue of moral and ethical aspects for us as to where we get our food, but it's also a matter of the health and well-being of the hen, which, of course, is reflected in the quality of the food that it produces. So backyard hens are good for the natural environment. One of the key things to keep in mind is the scale of what we're talking about. Traditional agriculture was smaller scale than industrial scale agriculture. Animals and plants were part of a combined cycle. The animals provided nutrients for the plants provided nutrients for the animals, all on site. In contrast, you saw the operation we had the image of earlier. That's not a closed cycle, and operations like that are a leading cause of degradation of the Chesapeake Bay degradations of the Chesapeake Bay as well as other American waterways. So hens reduce fossil fuel use. Remember, there's lots of fossil fuel related inputs to industrial agriculture, both on the both inputs as well as outputs. So this is a graphic of that cycle of traditional agriculture where the nutrients are reused on the land. Here's a better image of it. This is in Portland. There is a hen house in the back here. Here's where the hens are kept, and you can see this woman, which, by the way, this was on the Portland Tour de Coupe. You heard right, Tour de Coupe. Whereas that industrial scale agriculture breaks apart the plants and animals. And so then you have two problems. You got two problems. You got to put nutrients in, and you get nutrients as waste on the back end for both systems. And you got to put fossil fuels in on both ends, okay? So industrial scale agriculture, you're putting in chemical and fossil fuel-based fertilizers. There's fossil fuels that are needed for the transport. The waste comes out, but you don't have any animals there to use it, and certainly not at the scale that's needed. So you got waste coming out of the stream, and then ditto for the animals, it's separated. So here's a better way to see it. This is a chicken waste lagoon from an industrial scale facility in California. You can see the evidence of the oversupply of nutrients. So what traditional agriculture does and did was keep these nutrients on site and reuse them. So backyard hens help us to understand where food comes from, not from styrofoam. It's not just useful for children, but it's useful for we adults as well. They also connect us to nature, and they connect us to our history. How are we doing on time? How much time in are we? We got 10 minutes left? I'm eating into Jefferson's time. That's the problem here. Lots more garden helpers, weed controllers. They take what would otherwise be trash from the solid waste system and turn it into food. They are food suppliers. Wendell-Berry, anybody read Wendell-Berry? Anybody read about Wendell-Berry? He called this type of thing an elegant solution. So we had the freedom to do this. Not only could we do it, but the USDA said Uncle Sam expects us to keep hens and raise chickens. Anybody want to guess the year? I wish this was 2012. 40s is a good guess. It was actually World War I, although I wouldn't doubt that there was a similar promotional poster in World War II. But this was actually from 1918, and you can see a boy and a girl raising their hens. And so it is, in time of peace, a profitable recreation. In time of war, a patriotic duty. This is according to the U.S. government. Here in Arlington, we did the same. This is the home of Charles Drew, an eminent Arlingtonian for whom the Drew Model School is named. We're lucky to have members of the Charles Drew family here in Arlington today, and in fact here in the room. Thank you, Katie. But this is an image of the Drew family home, where Katie lives today, of a micro flock of hens. So this is an Arlington tradition as well. Lots of communities do this. This was one of the take-home points again. Not only is this something that we as Americans did in urban areas, but many communities continue to embrace this. The very biggest cities in the United States are hen legal. Many other cities comparable in various ways to Arlington not only allow hens, but many of them embrace hens. These are communities that are among the most livable and desirable in the country. I'm going to turn it over to Jefferson.
Well, hello, everyone. I know I've got a little bit more limited time. I wanted to just bring your attention to some of the different areas in the country where they just either traditionally or currently have the freedom to raise backyard chickens. One of the reasons, and there's a lot of reasons that have been put out there as to why Arlington isn't a community where this could happen, why Arlington is so special and so restrictive that we just can't do it here, even though you can do it in Chicago. And one of the reasons that it's been brought to sort of the community's attention that we can't have backyard hens here in a workable way is because Arlington is just too dense. Arlington is somewhere around 7,500 people per square mile, which is identical to Seattle. In Seattle, you can have 8 chickens per backyard in any single family home, up to 5,000 square feet. Beyond that, you can have another additional chicken per 1,000 square feet. You can also have 3 goats. You can have a potbelly pig. You can have 4 beehives. You can have some other things that don't come to mind right away. What's been the experience of Seattle with this? They think that it works just fine. In fact, just a few years ago, there was a limit of 3 chickens. And because there were no complaints and because it was incredibly popular, they expanded it to 8 chickens per household. Another similarly dense area would be Baltimore. Baltimore has a restriction on chicken numbers, and I forget exactly what, and it has a 25-foot setback. And it's been pointed out that the residential lots in Baltimore are smaller, and therefore most of the people wouldn't be able to do it. However, in Baltimore, the restriction is 25 feet from a building that contains essentially a sleeping area. So as long as you're 25 feet away from your neighbors sleeping, you can have chickens there. So there are quite a few people that are raising chickens in Baltimore. In Seattle, the limit is 10 feet. Let's look at New York, for example. In New York, the population density is in, say, the neighborhood of Brooklyn is 36,000 people per square mile. So it's around 6 times as dense as Arlington. You know what the setback restriction is in Brooklyn? None. There's no setback restriction. There's no limit on the number of chickens you can have. And we see that there are all these places that are just as dense or denser or not quite as dense, but around the size of Arlington and have a fantastic quality of life and are really great places to live. And does 100% of the population decide all of a sudden that they are urban farmers? No, it's a very small number. But that small number of people create a really powerful community feel. There are a lot of people that are really excited that their neighbors are raising chickens and give them eggs every once in a while. We went through a comprehensive study of about 21, I'm going to skip ahead because of time. We went through about 21 different jurisdictions, and DePaul University did a study 2 years ago looking at 21 jurisdictions where they relaxed restrictions on backyard hens. Out of those 21 jurisdictions, 15 of them said that the ordinance created a favorable experience in the community. 6 of them said it had no negative impact, no positive impact. 0% of these jurisdictions said allowing backyard livestock created a negative impact on the community. 0. So what's the problem? Some of the sort of scare tactics and misinformation that are out there is that, you know, we're going to get bird flu if we let chickens into the neighborhood, or that chickens carry salmonella, or, you know, whatever. But and that may be true. That's why when you make a turkey burger or you cook chicken, you wash your hands. And that's the modifier. That's the mitigating factor. You just plain normal basic sanitation. You wash your hands and you'll be fine. It's true that if you're a little kid, you might not recognize the danger of dealing with, you know, poo on the ground. You know, you might put your hands in your mouth, and that's why, you know, we monitor our children to make sure they don't do that. What are some of the other things that come up as a restrictive factor? One being that, we already have a number of farmers markets. And one thing I hope that this task force looks at is having a farmers market that's permanent year-round and open every day. Right now we have a limited network of farmers markets where it is true that if you have the time in a 3-hour window on Friday evening, you can go over to Ballston, or I'm sorry, Friday in the middle of the workday, you can go over to Ballston and get fresh eggs from within 100 miles of here. And that's true. And maybe that can be expanded and that can be part of the dialogue, but it doesn't change the fact that we can do this in Arlington. The people who want to do it can do it in Arlington. They can do it cleanly. They can do it safely. You could deal with any issues between neighbors the way that you deal with any other issue between neighbors. If you either talk to the neighbor, you report them to code enforcement. I would much rather have 3 chickens next to me than 3 dogs, quite frankly. And I love my dogs, but they're loud and my neighbors don't love them so much. But again, if they've talked to me, I've talked to them, we've developed mitigating factors because, you know, we're adults. And I think our time is almost up. What's that? Okay, so I'm going to turn it back to Ed. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, well, thanks, Jefferson. So we'll look forward to the discussion, but I did want to just make one summary point here, and that is among, you know, we have a history in Arlington of good governance and community participation. I would say that just like Thomas Jefferson suggested to us, at times we do need a little bit of a sense of rebellion, okay? And as much as this may be seen by some as forward-leaning, I think the evidence might suggest from other communities that it's not. I would say that Thomas Jefferson would also say, you know, sometimes you need to go beyond your boundaries. And so I think if you believe in Arlington, you believe that this is the kind of place where, because of our tradition of good governments, we would be able to craft the right sort of approach that would allow these many benefits to be realized, and then drawing from the experience of other communities to mitigate, eliminate, or reduce any risks that are associated with the keeping of backyard hens, just as we work to associate risks that are associated with any other thing we do, whether it's keeping animals that aren't hens or other sorts of practices.
Great. Thank you, Ed Jefferson. Let's give him a hand. No free eggs tonight? No samples? Hard-boiled even? Okay. All right. Next up is Next up is the cleverly named Backyards Not Barnyards group with Jim Pebley. Jim.
Hang on just a second. Let me get this going. Okay, can you escape? Okay. Kill it. There, the manual dexterity. All right, here we go.
So just point to me.
Lincoln Cummings, by the way, who I thought was hiking the Himalayas, is here. So Hank Cummings, one of our task
Got it.
force members.
Hi, can you hear me all right? All right, I'm not going to wander around. The folks out over at AIM are starting to have a problem with the wobble on the camera, so I'm going to be a stationary target, although I have been known to wander. My name is Jim Pebley. If you're interested in what my background is, it's in the back for the task force members. It's in the back of the briefing that I gave you a copy. I made sure you had a copy of. Yeah, I can handle this, I think, if everything works as planned. And it's not. Okay. I got a lot of material to cover because I work in systems engineering. Used to work in the Navy. I like to look at problems and analyze them, figure out what it is we're trying to do, what's going to happen if we do it, and work it all out in advance. I'll give you for background, though, that I grew up with chickens. I'm real familiar with chickens. We had a chicken house with about 12 chickens in it, and I used to be responsible for collecting the eggs, and when I was old enough, I was also responsible for collecting the egg layers that didn't lay enough eggs. So I've got a background on it. We exercised our right. We lived out on a 16-acre ranch where what we did didn't have a lot of impact on our neighbors. So unfortunately, when you live in Arlington, generally there's 3 people, maybe 2 on either side, and so when you do something, it always has an impact on those around you. When you look at what the Egg Project is advocating, and I don't doubt their earnestness on this, they're talking about this basically being sustainable, good for the environment, reducing the dependence on chemical fertilizer. Am I getting this right, Ed, because I took it right off your website. Producing eggs that are both superior in taste and nutrition, an excellent fertilizer, and raised in urban settings without negatively impacting neighbors. So what my briefing is going to do is we're just going to roll down through those and see how many of those arguments really hold water. This is really about, do we change the ordinance? Obviously, the ordinance was written so that you didn't have chickens within 100 yards of your neighbor's property or any other livestock. There's probably a pretty good reason they changed that for, and I would urge the task force to ask the county, what was the history on that? Why did that change? I would suspect it's because we went from an agricultural society here to more of an urban one where people are packed much more densely. I read your charge, and your charge was, as John said, to identify those critical gaps, look at ordinance changes, identify the pros and cons, and include backyard hens. So, I got to multitask here. A lot of information. I'm not going to read all this to you. But first, sustainability. When people say that's chicken feed, that the term is really mash. And I looked it up before I got here tonight. It runs $6 to $8. Okay? It takes approximately 2 pounds of chicken feed to create 1 pound of eggs. So when you think about it in terms of sustainability, you got to transport that from somewhere. Oh, wait a minute. Now you're hauling 2 pounds of feed here instead of 1 pound of eggs. Does that make sense economically? Is it sustainable? I went out to the market on Sunday morning and bought some eggs at Harris Teeter that they guaranteed were from free-ranging chickens, which, by the way, we're not talking about free-ranging chickens here. They promised there was no medication to fight any salmonella germs, antibiotics, and that there were no hormones. Cost $2.91 for a dozen eggs. That works out 24 cents retail. If you take those 2 pounds of mash that it takes to grow a pound of eggs, it works out to 56 cents an egg. That doesn't seem economical or sustainable, does it? Okay, our homegrown healthier? Well, I've provided you with some articles, the Centers for Disease Control, and what they had to say about the problem with salmonella. You can't get chicks that aren't guaranteed that they don't come with salmonella. When they've got them, you either got to give them antibiotics to get rid of it, or you got to live with it, which means, as you say, washing your hands, your eggs, your kids, the dog, whatever it takes. And all of those droppings that go on the ground are going to wind up somewhere. Well, chickens will denude any area they're in long enough, because on top of the food and the mash and the grit that they eat, so they've got a crop that digests the food, they're going to pick the ground clean. Then you're going to have droppings on it, and when it rains, guess what happens? If it isn't perfectly level, in which case it remains yours, it becomes one of the neighbors, or it eventually winds up in the storm drain system. Is that better for the environment? I don't think so. Okay, free fertilizer. Well, according to the EPA, it's not as good a fertilizer as you can buy in a store, because it's got a lot of phosphorus and it's got a lot of potassium in it. So whatever you put into the soil, you're going to have to add extra water to wash out the potassium and the phosphorus. So I looked it up this morning and said, well, shoot, if that's good fertilizer, how about dogs and cats? And I found an article that says you could use dogs and cats waste for fertilizer. You got to cook it because it's got bad things in it. So does a chicken waste. That came from the University of Michigan. Free fertilizer, all right. According to the doctor over at George Mason who weighed in on this, we're going to add load to the water treatment plants with this. Impact on neighbors. What happens when you don't go out and collect the eggs? Well, guess what? The chickens like to go find other places than just the hen house to lay eggs, and they hide them. If they sit there when they're hidden and you don't find them, guess what happens? They rot, or they attract vermin and varmints. The same thing with droppings. We got a rat problem in Arlington, folks. When the district does a better job on their rats, they come over here. They swim, okay? If you haven't seen them, they're nice big Norwegian browns. One of the rat force guys told me he went and counted the holes on an acre of vacant land down in Crystal City. It had 1,000 rat holes in it. Rats love waste. Squirrels love waste. Foxes love chickens. All of the creatures that are out there that would be out there normally are going to try to get to those chickens. Stormwater, we talked about that. I love the picture on the right. That's about, I would say from my experience, about 4 days worth of droppings if you don't pick them up. The egg task force I've heard before say, hey, it's perfectly clean if you go out and clean the hen house 3 times a day. That chicken waste is partially liquid. Liquid sinks into the boards. I can tell you right now from our hen house, when we finally got rid of the hens and tried to make a clubhouse out of it, it didn't work because you couldn't get the chicken smell out of it. That's going to quaff over to your neighbors. Once again, there is an impact. There is a cost. This is not such a great deal. Other governments allow it. Okay, let's take a look at Baltimore. We'll talk about setbacks in a second. Charlottesville, Richmond, Portland all have larger lot sizes. How are you going to enforce this? I think Ms. Ciotti knows I used to be, when I was on the Planning Commission, I was the chair of the Zoning Ordinance Committee. And I'm telling you right now, you can't write enough regulations to make people behave. You can write them all day long. People are not going to follow all the regulations you write, which means someone out there is going to go right out and bust the hen limit, bring in roosters, not collect the eggs, not clean up. Who is going to be the person or persons that enforces the code that you say we can get by with if everyone is a good citizen and does what they're supposed to do? Well, it costs about $75,000 a year just to hire your basic staffer, and we're already understaffed. You got to ask the questions that are up there on the slide. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the bottom line is you're going to wind up having to be the poultry police. And what you're going to do if you have poultry and you don't follow the rules, it makes your neighbors have to do it. And the neighbors, may go out and tell you, hey, that's not nice. And I think you're going to find, having been a civic association president, and I would ask some of the civic association presidents you're midst, How does that work when you get called in the middle of the night because somebody's dog is barking and they're not following the rules? They ask you to do it because they want to do it because they got to live with those people and they're going to hate them forever if they bring it up. Let's get, oh, wait a minute, went too far. Okay, the hen house. I looked at that online. It's $300. Add that to the price of the chicken feed and everything else. This is not an alternative food solution, okay? And what is to say you can't build the one down on the left? I particularly like that one. I could have come up. I had chicken coop pictures all day long of nightmares that your neighbors can build, if they want to, just out of plain old chicken wire. Let's talk about lot size. Let's talk about the reality, because this is really about changing the zoning regulations. This is a typical 5,000 square foot lot, what you'd call R5, in a single family dwelling in Arlington. You've got a 60-foot frontage, which gives you an 83 feet along the side. You've got the setbacks on the side. This is only a 35%. You can go larger on the size of this house. If you follow the Baltimore rules, you see the little sliver down there? That's where you can have your chickens if you have to keep 25 feet from the boundary. Now, I'm told that I've heard that some of the advocates are talking about asking for a 10-foot limit. That means you've got chickens within 10 feet of your neighbors, imposing all of those things we talked about before with runoff, noise, pollution, attraction of dogs and wild animals. You know, I got to go back and ask myself as a systems engineer, what problem are we trying to solve for all these problems and unintended consequences we may be buying ourselves? 5 minutes? Okay, I can cover a lot in 5 minutes. That's an R6 lot. Okay, you're up to 50 feet on that Baltimore solution. So, you know, it's not fun being negative about things. I'm spending a lot of time on other projects in Arlington being for things. So I asked myself, okay, if we really got to have chickens, if it's really that important to have education, it's a critical gap, what are some of the things that you as task force members might want to consider as an alternative to what we're talking about here? Why not let the civic associations decide if they want to have a community hen house? They're the ones that would be impacted. They'd be the ones that would have to enforce it. I looked online to see how many 4-H and Future Farmers of America, for those of you who don't know what FFA is, how many clubs we have in the high schools. 0 of those clubs in our high schools. If there's a need, I'm wondering why we don't have some of them. Food assistance groups. I think that food assistance groups might be encouraged, if allowed, to use some of that county property, some of what you see is what they call level 4 maintenance. And that's not maintained, to let them use that. You know, talk about communal uses and sanitizing the waste and some other things. Somebody who's in the audience who will know who he is challenged me as to whether or not I really was raised with chickens. I challenged my brothers back in California to find something. Oh, we didn't take a lot of pictures of our chickens back then. But that's me. I was 3. And that's a chicken down in the bottom left. I could have brought the clip in. We also had a turkey, but I wasn't in it and didn't want to try to put something out there that wasn't actual proof. And if I get good on the next presentation, the next time we do this, Ed, I'll have a picture of the chicken house. Okay, so, you know, it's a good idea, but you got to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? Is this worth all of the trouble that you're going to probably bring? And I'll add, I just noticed out front, Winchester just turned down having chickens, allowing them. And the problem is, all you hear about are the places that do. I haven't seen a list here of the places that don't, if we're going to be fair about it. I'll be ready for questions. Thank you very much.
Take
Okay, thanks for the questions. Cost for the hen keeper. It varies, just as the cost of raising children varies, depending on what a family would like to do. But there is a voluntary nature of this as well that I would point out. Of course, under our proposal, no Arlington residents would be obligated to raise hens. I think it'd be wonderful if they did. But if they did choose to do that, that would be something that they would take on. And the costs would be commensurate with what they wanted, with how they wanted to raise the hens. Maybe one way to think about it is the vegetable garden, right? So I raise tomatoes in good years and do a pretty good job. Some years, my cost per tomato is probably pretty high, but I don't do it just to save money. I do it because it's a connection with land, it's a connection with food, it's education for my kids. And I think the same is true for a lot of hen keepers, that the benefits are beyond the financial. On the enforcement, which is a good question, couple things that I would point to. We did have a slide on this, but thanks to Kimbrel, we've got on the website now the DePaul study that Jefferson mentioned, a survey of communities that have recently embraced backyard hen keeping. One of the things that was concluded in that report was that reported violations were very minimal. And that is actually consistent with other data that we've heard, is that the burden on local staff is not extraordinary. One of the, we have done a little bit of research, and it tends in communities to vary. Some have animal control entities, whether within the government or an external contractor, as we do here in Arlington, have the responsibility for enforcement. Others have it within the county government or the jurisdictional government in another department, so it varies. But certainly some communities have one person or less. But I wouldn't be in a position to tell you exactly what the average is, except to point that the enforcement provisions, at least according to those communities that have responded to surveys, are pretty minimal.
Is it still on? I'll be perfectly frank. I haven't calculated the cost of chickens because I don't intend on buying any. Just to make that clear, I would be willing to bet you, though, that you're going to go through, I don't know, about 140 pounds of mash a year for a couple of chickens. So you can do the math on that. 25 pounds will run you about $8. You've got the cost of the hen house. If you buy one online, I showed you a typical one I found around $300. I don't know how many eggs you got to amortize that over how many years to figure out. And don't forget that the hens start out laying. They peak at about 2 years of laying almost maybe a couple of eggs a day. Sound about right, Ed? And trail off something like that. I don't know. But the bottom line is, over about 4 years, they're going to decline in their laying. Plus, there's seasonal variation. So, trying to nail down the cost would be an interesting problem. I think we ought to ask staff that question myself, because they're paid to do that kind of tough calculation work, and can't really say, oh no, not me. Okay. Now, enforcement. I know something about enforcement. Like I said, having been on fiscal affairs way back when, I have this serial volunteering thing that I've got to get out of. But I could quote you that $75,000, that's your entry-level staffer with all the burden costs, including benefits and everything else. Okay, so you got to figure out, all right, so if we have 100 chicken licenses, permits, use permits, however you're going to regulate this, right, and you've got to add just one staffer on to do that, figure out what the cost would be passed back to the citizen that wants to raise those chickens if 100 folks had to share the cost of a $75,000 staffer a year. That gets a little daunting when you start thinking about the reality of it. And don't forget about the folks that don't have the chickens but live next to the chickens. I believe, Daryl, didn't you have some chickens living next to you?
Yeah, I did.
And how much did that cost you?
Well, for abatement, so, I had a rat problem. I said that I was a citizen at large. One of the reasons I'm on the task force is that I lived next to an illegal hen house for approximately a year. So I had code enforcement come out twice, I had Health and Human Services come out twice, and I've had 3 police officers to my house. So that's just one instance. Now, maybe my situation is unique and rare, I will give you that. But I will tell you this, Mary, you were talking to me in front of my house, and you witnessed an incident as well. So it's not, I'll talk about it later with my time, but
Sure.
I'm just letting you know that it's not.
I just want people to understand that there are associated costs, not just with the person that has the chicken, but maybe the people next door, okay? Or deal with a runoff problem. Or their dog goes and eats one of the chickens because somebody left the door open. Now who's responsible for that? That's all I've got.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, now we're going to go around real quick. Vice Chair Joan Harwood, any questions, quips?
Question for both sides. I just recently got back from Milwaukee where they have finished a pilot program allowing for hens. And they had no complaints. But other cities obviously have been doing this for a longer time. Which cities have the longest track record in allowing hens in an urban environment? And have there been any cities that have removed the permission?
Well, not being an advocate, I haven't gone out to check and see how many cities are happy with it. I do know that in my musings through online, I found out that last year there was a sizable city in Delaware that just revoked their chicken provisions because they were having problems. But here's the problem. Let's go back and talk about something like accessible dwellings. Remember when we went through all that? We went through all of the pain and suffering of determining whether or not you could have accessible dwellings, and they changed the ordinances. Well, guess what happens now when somebody moves somebody into their basement next door? It used to be when it wasn't actually allowed, you might have a case, but the average public person can say, oh, that's allowed now under accessible dwellings. What good would it do me to complain? So don't you think that might skew the numbers that you're getting for complaints? For a while there, the folks from the Egg Project were telling me there are no complaints from Baltimore. They called their enforcement folks over there to find out. And I found out, no, actually it's public health over there that's supposed to be in charge of it, and I haven't been able to get an answer back from them, but I tried.
Please be crisp and economical with your answers.
Certainly. Does not appear to be on, so I will just be yelling.
It takes a moment, just press the mute button.
How about now?
We can hear you anyway.
Okay. So the cities that we looked at were the ones that we were most familiar with. So we looked at Seattle, which has been allowing backyard hens since the 80s. And Okay, I think I can answer this for you. So this is a technique in whole systems agriculture called a chicken tractor. So what it means is that this coop is movable, and usually ordinances require that coops be movable. So the chickens are allowed to work this area, tilling it up, fertilizing it, doing whatever, and then when it gets to a certain point, you move the whole unit to a new area. And so it's not necessarily on wheels. It's either on a slide or it could be on a wheel. But that's the concept behind the chicken tractor, is that you just keep moving it around. So you move them to their food source. Is that the question?
Well, I was just, at what point does it no longer become agrarian?
Well, I guess it would depend on how you.
Are you suggesting that what you're recommending here is that we put that coop in a cage in the backyard and a wheel?
Well, I think there's some definitional issues here. So I'm not sure what you mean by agrarian. That is a coop, right. Which I guess could also be a cage. It's just a different term. A chicken cage is a coop. So I think there's nothing more essential to an agrarian lifestyle than livestock. So by that definition, it's an agrarian. Is that your question?
They only have the food that you give it, because they can't get to the weeds and the bugs.
No, they can, because you can move them around, and they're also going to dig through the soil. So say if you treated it underneath it to sort of deal with the waste issue, a lot of people, what they do is they spread compost or straw on the bottom of it, which draws in earthworms. So the chickens actually dig and eat the earthworms and the grubs. When they've gone through it, or you just keep adding compost to it. A lot of people just put kitchen waste in there, and they eat the kitchen waste. As they move through it and you see the need for it, you would take this whole thing, get a couple of people, pick it up, scoot it over to the next area. And that's where it gets the whole idea of a tractor, because it's also tilling up and regenerating the soil as it's going along.
Jim, do you have anything to add real quick?
Yeah, it doesn't look mobile to me, and doesn't look like it's free ranging either. Okay, so I mean, I have some. I'm glad you put this up, because who's going to regulate how the coops are run? Are we going to have to write extra ordinance language about how often they're moved, the size, what they look like? It seems like a lot of work.
Okay, Lynn Cummings, I'm sorry, Rosemary Seattle.
Hi, this is very interesting. I know that Mr. Pedley responded to cost because it was in the original slide, but that seems to be a red herring here. For some reason, we're going down a rabbit hole, so to speak, with cost, because if hens, as I suspect, will often be pets, as humans are wont to be, especially when you have 6 or 7 of them. They become pets. People name them. And we don't ask. If you ask any dog owner in Arlington what they pay, what the costs are for their dog or their cat in a year, it's shocking what we pay, what we spend on our pets. So I think we are really kind of getting off the track. If I understand this correctly, we're worried about health and safety and noise. And if we see it as a pet, we can say that about our dogs or our cats. There's issues of cats not being kept in the house. They get out. They kill people's birds. They get in people's yards. They do all kinds of mischief. And people's dogs, it's legend, the nuisance that our dogs are to people who don't have dogs. They bark in the middle of the night. They go on, relieve themselves on people's lawns, and they kill their grass. I mean, there's all kinds of things. We don't have code enforcement for that. People call the police when they see our dogs off leash. All right. But other than that, we don't have code enforcement for our dogs or our cats. How often do we change the litter? How often do we walk our dogs? Some of us give our dogs organic dog food. Other people give them Purina. We don't regulate those things. Some of us that are really trying to abide by the rule pay the treasurer of Arlington County $25 a year for a license. But other than that, so I think that some of these arguments are seem to not be the arguments we need to be having, because it's a pet and we don't regulate other pets. These pets give us eggs. So I'm more concerned about the salmonella conversation, whether or not the droppings will really get into the wastewater. Those, I think, are really the important issues. Also, I have a question. It's I understand people get their hens now. I mean, I grew up out in the country, so it was a little different. But now I understand you get them in the mail. You get chicks in the mail, and they're really little, and it's really hard to tell when they're really that little if they're roosters. They're boy chickens or girl chickens, and so what happens when one of them turns out to be a rooster? And how do we? Those are the questions that I have, because that's a noise. But I'm more into safety and the environment, the water system. I think what we pay for our pets is not germane, and we don't regulate how many times people clean their litter box.
Gentlemen, that's a lot to react to. Go for it.
Let me try to make this crystal, as the chairman asked. First off, I firmly believe it would be much more economical if my dog that I recently got that lays eggs, if I did that, because the dog has cost a lot. The rest we didn't, But anyway, okay. The reason we talked about that was because of the issue of sustainability. It says it in the county mission, sustainable. What does that mean? Okay, that means can you continue to do this economically and do it for long term? I maintain eggs as written is not sustainable. Okay, as far as the safety goes, CDC wrote and has on their website a whole page about the problems with salmonella, especially if it gets exposed to old people and to kids. And I'm telling you right now, the kids will get into this. Okay? My brother had salmonella. One brother had salmonella. Another one had roundworms. Different problem. Those are from another critter I didn't want to talk about. Okay, so you have safety issues for this, and how are you going to enforce it? You know, we're not talking about this is a food source. So when you get a chicken that's you turn it upside down, you can't tell it's a rooster. Later on, what do you do with it? What happens to the hens when they get done laying? We don't normally eat our pets. How are you going to handle that?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Rosemary, for the comments and questions. A lot of good issues raised there. First, just to build on something that Jim said, of course, the CDC has a responsibility to identify risks to people. They do that for things including swimming, owning dogs, traveling, raising children, bringing those children to daycare and to school, and having sex. All of those things are legal and regulated to some extent or another. And so I just want to correct, let there be no mischaracterization that there are no unique or unaddressable risks associated with hen keeping, and CDC, USDA, and other expert guidance can tell us how it is that we as hen keepers and we as a community can eliminate or manage those risks. That is exactly what I hope the task force and we as a community will be doing to address exactly what Rosemary was talking about. Numbers is one of the things, Rosemary, keep in mind. We saw the photo of the industrial scale chicken farm in West Virginia. That is not a sustainable or hygienic process. Those are numbers that are literally in the billions if you count up that facility and neighboring facilities. And so one of the things that we can control, one of the things we can regulate is the number of hens that are allowed on a property. Likewise, noise. Hens are not noisy, roosters are. Therefore, that is something you can regulate. Personally, when I get hens, if and when this community allows me to do that legally, I will buy them after they have been sexed. That is, you can go to Bluemont, Virginia, or to Tyson's Corner, believe it or not, at the Potomac Vegetable farms and actually buy hens that are known to be hens, and that way you would not be taking the risk of getting a rooster should Arlington choose to legalize hens but not roosters. One of the final things I just want to comment on, I really appreciate Rosemary raising the issue of animals and our connection to animals. I would contend that we are more human for our connection to animals. It's something that has been lost to some extent in our society in recent decades. I think that many, many people are rediscovering via pets and via agriculture our connection to animals, and I think that's a good thing for all of us. And just as dogs and other pets bring something to our lives for many people who choose to have them, so it is that backyard hens, pets with benefits, food-producing companions, can also do that. It's what we've done for 10,000 years, and I hope Arlington will embrace that again.
Thank you. Katie Drew? Oh, I'm sorry, Link. Yeah, I crossed him out when I need to reinstate it. Link. Okay. I too grew up on a dairy farm with chickens. So I have a little bit of perspective. Almost a year ago, the subject first arose of chickens. And so the Arlington Committee 100 put a program on, and we heard the same speakers and much of the same things. In preparation of that program, I went out to a whole bunch of the counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia and asked their enforcement people what did they think. The bottom line is that about a half of the people I talked to, their counties had adopted policies of allowing chickens. The typical chicken coop, which at that time they said was costing $700 or $800, a year later sold for $20 or $30. What has changed?
I want to know where you can buy them. What communities was that? Because when I looked on Martha Stewart's website, Home Depot, Lowe's, they were a little more expensive. So I don't know, Link, to be honest. I'm not sure. But what I can say is the fact that people like Martha Stewart and a lot of other figures of national importance, both for architecture, design, as well as food, have embraced this. And so I don't know about the numbers, but one thing I can observe is that many, many more people are keeping backyard hens, and the market, appropriately enough, is reacting to that, and you do see a lot of major providers of home and furnishings and chefs that are part of this.
Sells, but she does not grow. I know she was a neighbor of mine in a summer place. She does not.
Yet another reason to get to know you, Lincoln. This is good. You've got a lot of good info.
I heard Martha Stewart has color-coordinated eggs coming out of her. It's in an article on his website from the New York Times recently. And I said, well, isn't that wonderful? I'm not sure what the relevance is, except the eggs look better before you break them. As far as the costs go, I can't tell you what data you've seen. I suspect those $20 hen houses were probably kits that looked a lot like the alternative one I showed you earlier.
My point is that people thought it was very valuable at the beginning. They learned a lesson and threw it away.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Katie Drew, followed by David Garcia.
All right, well, actually, Rosemary asked my question about disease, so I just wanted to make a comment. I did some quick math on the chicken feed, and I believe it was $8 for a 25-pound bag. That amounts to 32 cents a pound. If you need 2 pounds, that's 64 cents to make a pound of eggs. And a pound of eggs is about 8 eggs, because a large egg weighs about 2 ounces. So it would cost 64 cents for 8 eggs, or 96 cents a dozen, just in terms of feed. So I was thinking about how much it cost, but that wasn't clear enough to me earlier, so now you know.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie. David Garcia, to be followed by Daryl Hobbs.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Peebley. I was quite intrigued by your presentation, in particular with the comment about dog refuse that can actually be used as fertilizer. So I'll go ahead and research that, because in all my research, I didn't see one city who's actually doing that. So, but nonetheless, again, I want to touch upon what Rosemary said. In particular, I do agree with you that the whole issue of enforcing is going to be very difficult. And I'm reminded of this every time I walk by my neighborhood here in Westover, when I see dog refuse in a lot of places there. So with your concern of salmonella and all these other things, how do you reconcile this issue with urban hens, and yet at the same time not look at the thousands of dogs that we actually have here in Arlington County that do actually go ahead and, you know, leave their things behind, and you know, all the things that go along with it. So the health issue was really what kind of stood out for me, and I'd like to see if you can address that, juxtaposing against with the dog issues.
Well, I thought I was here to talk about hens, but I think you hit on something there, and we do have a problem with dogs. I mean, there is a noise ordinance. I know I had to go after a neighbor about it. The neighbor's still not speaking to me because they left the dog sitting out barking in freezing weather for a week, which barked continuously. Every morning as you leave for work, you put the dog out and you got to listen to it. First time we asked them about it, they said, go to hell. The next time, I called code enforcement, and of course that was 10 years ago. We're still not real good friendly neighbors, okay? But there is a problem with dogs. You know, people aren't picking up the poop. The poop's winding up in the litter cans in our cars. And if you look at some of those refuse containers, because as Civic Association president used to look at that, they get shredded by the rats and squirrels, and sure enough, it's leaking on the ground, and out it goes. People walk down the street, and sometimes you'll see them not cleaning up after the dog solid waste. And when was the last time you saw somebody pick up after the dog liquid waste? So you already got a problem with dogs, so we're going to buy one with chickens too. I don't know. It just seems to add.
So thanks for the comment, David. One observation is that our ordinances on animals are arbitrary. So it's interesting. Of course, dogs are legal, hens are not. But even if you think about within the same family of species, you can keep most any bird in Arlington except for the ones that produce food. And so it is more broadly that we are allowed in Arlington and most suburban and urban communities to keep a range of animals. The ones that are typically banned in those communities that aren't as enlightened as some of those ones we've highlighted are the ones that are of direct benefit to us in providing food. We could probably have somebody write a dissertation on why that is, why it is that we have chosen that path, but it's an observation that I want to make because I think it's important. I have dogs. I love my dogs. They don't produce food. It's legal, and certainly there's a responsibility that comes with keeping animals, whether dogs or whether backyard hens.
Thank you very much. Daryl Hobbs to be followed by Dennis Yaffe.
Can everyone hear me? Great, so thanks. So as I said earlier, I've lived behind a chicken house or next to a chicken house for approximately a year, and I'm familiar with the smell, noise, rats, and confrontation that has come along with that, unfortunately. Ed, you listed on your presentation that the CDC warns you against all types of things like drinking bottled water, traveling, sending your kids to daycare, and sex, actually. But none of those impact your ability to enjoy your property. And that's what we're talking about with hens. I've noticed that most people who have hen houses tend to put their hen house as far away from their structure as possible next to their neighbor's yard. I hope that everyone here is familiar that Arlington County Code requires you, as the property owner, to abate for rats. So even if your neighbor is the cause of rats, if they end up nesting on your property, you're responsible for paying for the cost to get rid of those rats. And that's not an option. That's a requirement by the code. So, you know, my question is that I was in Toronto last week, and I noticed also that you say in your presentation that there are no unique health risks associated with backyard hens. But yet last week in the major newspaper of Toronto, the UK Institute of Zoology and the Hanoi School of Public Health both stated that the majority of human diseases are transmitted from domestic livestock like pigs, chickens, and cows. The research goes on to say that the northeastern U.S. may be a hot spot for emerging disease such as bird flu and Lyme disease. So the question is, how do you make this statement? Have you done research? Have you talked to public health officials? I mean, how do we know that there's no additional risk associated with, additional disease with having backyard hens? I know that you've answered that question, but my question is specifically, what research have you done to back up that point that you're making in your presentation? Thank you.
Well, that's what the CDC indicates. It's also a direct quote from the Arlington top public health official.
And by the way, let me just interject here because we've gotten some written comments from folks. And I just want to assure people that this task force has the full resources of Arlington County to call on. The public health director of Arlington and a whole range of other county staff is available to us as resources, and we will be tapping in. We have, and we will continue to tap into their expertise as we deliberate and move further along.
And just out of curiosity, who was that top public health official of Arlington County? Their name?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for the county's public Department of Health, and so I think we should take John up on that, and they're a great resource. It was one of the first meetings that we as a group did to try to get information as well as to share with Dr. Varghese what we were doing as neighborhood advocates. But, again, in Arlington, we take community processes and decisions seriously, and I would strongly encourage the task force to look very carefully at benefits as well as risks, and we are very confident as a group that that sort of unbiased and science-based review would affirm why it is that so many thoughtful and leading communities in this country and around the world embrace this.
I'm reminded by Kim Hahn, Evelyn Papel, who is with the Arlington County Public Health Department. Evelyn, would you like just to, you want to say something in 30 seconds?
Simply, Dr. Ruben Varghese, V-A-R-G-H-E-S-E, is our health director for Arlington, and he did meet with Mr. Finley. And we feel we are neutral, but we're happy to provide in regard to the issue of backyard hens. We feel it's a community decision, and we do think that we do have rates for salmonella in the community, and I have that information when it's appropriate to share it. And we believe that so much of disease transmission can be contained by good hand washing and good hygiene.
Thank you. Jim Kebley, on the same topic that Darrell mentions.
Yeah, I did some reading on that because I'm currently in the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission. Like I said, I'm a serial joiner. The whole issue of things like avian flu, it is true. It's coming out of a lot of bird flocks overseas, primarily in China, where there's a lot of small flocks kept by individual farmers, farmhouses, close proximity. Right now, that flu, that virus only transmits by close contact and is not spread by human. If it mutates, what I read the day before yesterday is sort of where they think the Spanish influenza in 1970 came from, at least what I've read. The problem to me is I don't see that as a big issue. However, I will caution you that one of the concerns that I read in World Health was that migratory birds, if they pick this up, their droppings, let's say in passing a hen house downstream or something, could spread it around.
Okay, thank you. Dennis Yaffe, followed by Amy McCloskey.
Thank you. First, I wanted to ask Mr. Pebley a two-part question. Why do you think this allowing the backyard hens is working elsewhere, but it would not work here in Arlington? And the corollary to that, where has it been attempted? Where has it become allowed in recent decade or two, and then it been reversed? And what were the problems that led to that? And the question that I'd like to ask of all of you, especially Mr. Fenley, in response to Darrell's comments and questions that he just presented, frankly, that causes concern for me. And so I refer back to your document that spoke of Goldilocks. What kind of regulations could there be that you alluded to, but I didn't hear specified, that would not go from 0 to 100, but be more, but would loosen the restrictions compared to now? Glad to. Why do you think it is working elsewhere in the cities that were mentioned, where you think it would not work here? And if you could.
Charlottesville, Portland, I went and looked online at their average lot sizes. That's the only thing I can do, is go and look. Their average lot sizes are bigger. In Baltimore, the average lot sizes, get this, a quarter the size of an Arlington lot. Now, if you've got to have your hens 25 feet from the lot line, well, you're not going to have a lot of people building hen houses. Plus the fact that their public health service is the one that does the enforcement. And I'm not sure how to get those statistics, to be perfectly honest. You know, I'm not looking for the place, I'd be perfectly honest, you know, I'm not trying to go out and find out how many places it's working for or how many places it's not working. I just care about whether or not I think it's going to work here. And I don't.
So you asked about the specificity of regulations. We as a group, the Arlington Egg Project, have a position that was arrived at through our own discussions, and that position is reflected in our petition. We say no roosters, we say limited numbers, and we call for measures to ensure secure and proper and humane housing for hens. We as a group also called for a community dialogue with the specific idea that exactly how you structure those regulations is a topic that we as advocates don't presume to have the answer. But that's exactly why we're happy to see this conversation going on, and as much as the resources of Arlington County staff and others are with us to research, we think that's great because that's exactly what I think will get us at options for the county board to modify the ordinance such that we can meet and address any concerns that the community might have while allowing the benefits. One thing I would say that is embodied in what we as a group believe in is that numbers. I want to stress that, and while the Arlington Egg Project has not specified a number, I would observe that many urban communities have a limit between 3 and 8, so that's an observation. And some communities do have a setback requirement. In Seattle, it's 10. It is often based not on lot lines as in Arlington County, but it is often based on proximity to a dwelling unit other than your own. Again, that's a Seattle thing. And then many urban communities, although not all, have ordinances that ban roosters. So those are 3 types of measures that other communities have taken. I hope the task force will look at. We circulated sample ordinances from several communities, and I hope the group will look at that. And then one final one, just to reiterate, Jefferson indicated this in one of his answers, but some communities require movement of hen coops. That is the case in Baltimore. And again, that is a regulatory means of getting at the good practice of trying to ensure that nutrient recycling and trying to be as humane and try to provide as good a life as possible to the hens.
Okay, let's try and pick up the pace just a little bit here. Amy McCloskey, followed by Charlie Mang.
I need it for sure. Is it? Can you hear me? Is it on? Yes. For Arlington, just put it real close to you. I'm really For Arlington Egg Project, this is kind of a repeat question, but again, do you have a strategy for an implementation, a phase-in implementation plan, or have you looked at other communities that kind of did pilots or did a phase-in implementation program, maybe with suggestions of chicken coop sizes or education?
Yeah, phase-in, that is something that we are aware of, and certainly in Arlington, there is a history where a policy measure or initiative is taken as a pilot project so as to allow for the community to consider and review it. So while, again, we as a group don't have a position on that, it's something we're aware of, and it's something that Arlington has done. Education is another really important one, and again, we as a group have taken a look at that. We have a lot of resources right here in Arlington. One of the ones that I would put at the top of the list is, in addition to Arlington County staff, is the Virginia Cooperative Extension, which does have an Arlington office and is a source of educational material and promotions and good practices for a range of garden and agriculture related. So I think that's exactly the type of thing that if and when Arlington embraces it, I know that VCE has indicated that they would be very open to trying to add resources to educate people on how it is that you can realize the benefits and be a good hen keeper. But certainly I think that's something that Arlington does well, and were we to embrace hen keeping, in addition to having regulatory controls, I think it would make perfect sense to have educational and programmatic efforts as well.
I wouldn't expect, I mean, the egg project folks really believe in this stuff, and I wouldn't expect them to have to put up on their site a lot of other information because of their entrance. So to be fair to them, and Ed's been a friend, I have no doubt this is how you move in that direction if that's where you want to go. I felt that, you know, it wasn't their responsibility, nor would I expect them to put up all the other side of the story. And to be perfectly honest, when I heard this was coming down the way, back in January, I had a middle-level staffer from the county walk up to me outside the hardware store over at Westover and said, "Jim, chickens? Really? Now we got to do chickens?" And then I had somebody else come up to me and say, "You got to help us with this, Jim. You know what's going on. Get the word out." And so that's the purpose of this. The implementation is going to fall back on your task force. I mean, and then it's going to wind up in places like the Zoning Ordinance Committee, the Planning Commission. Rosemary gets to do this twice, to try to figure out how to write something that's going to work, that's enforceable, that doesn't do harm or create unintended consequences. I don't envy your task, but that's what you have to choose.
Charlie May, followed by Sarah Meservey. Sarah left, so John Moore is then after Charlie.
John, Mr. Yaffe has already asked the question that I would have asked, so I'll pass.
Charlie May passes. Sarah's not here. John Moore.
I have a question about, and this is an issue that is important to me. Right now, we don't have an issue with food security, really. We have bountiful and plentiful food, but I would like both of your comments regarding the potentiality of a situation where food security might one day be a problem, and what response you might have one day if we don't have access to eggs, or we have an interruption in the food supply system, or resources become scarce. How would you speak to the benefits of having poultry in an urban setting?
Well, I just read this afternoon they're calling back 30,000 pounds of ground beef because it's contaminated. I think in our environment we expect the food that's in our supermarkets to be safe, that you can eat it, you're not going to get sick, it's not going to make your kids mutate. Having chickens, now you're responsible for all of those
So just to follow up, you feel that it would be a benefit to transfer custody of your food to a system over which you have no control?
Let's see. I would say that with the regulation that goes on and with the public pressure about bad food, that I would probably trust the food in the supermarket, number one. Then I would probably trust the food in the farmer's market, number two. Might be fresher, okay? And number three, I would not accept, quote, fresh eggs from my next door neighbor, because I don't know what he's doing with them.
I think one thing that's important to just take from that story is that I'm not sure how many of those pounds of meat that were recalled were grown in someone's backyard. They were grown in a factory. When you grow food in a factory, you have absolutely no control over how it's labeled, how the animals are treated. You don't know anything about it. And you also give up your sovereignty over your own well-being. You give up security, you give up resiliency. And one of the reasons that, we garden in our backyard, we raise bees, we want to have chickens, we want to do all these things is because we want to say, okay, maybe I don't have to raise all my own eggs, but why not? If I can, why shouldn't I be allowed to do it? It's a liberty interest, and it's your ability to have self-sufficiency. And it's empowering to people to say, you know what, those eggs are a little creepy. I don't know what went into that. I don't know what weird biotics you're putting into it. I don't know whether there's genetically modified things in there because you don't have to label whether or not something's genetically modified. And I don't know how you're treating the chickens, but having grown up in West Virginia and seen what battery chicken operations look like, it is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And when we talk about it, and it all ties together, it's not just about local food security. We can't live off of our garden or our chickens for a very long period of time, but we can live off them for a substantial period of time if necessary. And having that kind of control keeps you aware of the inputs and the outputs in the system. You forget about the 19 billion with a B chickens at the head of the Potomac pooping into the Chesapeake and absolutely destroying it. I mean, the Chesapeake is not really a life-giving body anymore because of battery chicken and industrial food, which is what this point of view supports. And our point of view is that we should look at local, sustainable solutions based on self-resiliency because that, quite frankly, it's the American way. That's what we want to do. Our experience with people that raise their own chickens has been that they keep them till end of life as pets. So that's about half of them because, this is Bianca. I'm not going to eat Bianca. Some people decide, they get an animal, and it turns out, unfortunately, because it was a very young one, it's a rooster. And in places where it's illegal, those end up being slaughtered. A lot of communities that have backyard chickens also have organizations. There's one in Portland called Oregon Tilth, and one of the responsibilities of that organization, which has some community support and some government support, is to teach people how to deal with these situations. And perhaps the Virginia Cooperative Extension and expanding 4-H in the schools is a way to look at this, but you teach humane slaughter. This is how we turn a chicken into chicken soup. This is how we create whatever we're going to create out of it. There are also mobile, and I always forget the term, I want to say abattoir, but that might not be right. There are mobile operations that will come in and slaughter any animals that you want. You know, quite frankly, there are religious people that are trained to slaughter animals in ritualistically clean ways. You know, so there are a number of opportunities from doing it yourself, not doing it, outsourcing it to someone in your community, creating a local connection and a local source of economic sufficiency by, you know, connecting with your community. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and it's going to be as individual as the people. And, you know, I've always had a hard time putting any animal down, you know, so I think I would have a very, very hard time harvesting a chicken, but others, maybe not so much.
Wow, good question. I kind of liked his answer, although I didn't like it, because we don't normally slaughter our pets. This is a big problem. So what are you going to write into, and I throw it back to you. What would you write into the ordinance about what you do with chickens at the end of their productivity or end of life? Do you allow the owners to slaughter them? How do you regulate that? Wow. It's tough. So unless we're going to have animal welfare start taking care of the chickens, or we're going to have chicken rescue, or you know, live free, or die chickens or something out somewhere, prison chickens. So you got a problem there, and I don't know how to answer it because I'm not advocating the chickens.
Just a quick follow-up. Jefferson, is there any sort of like old chickens home or
Farm taken?
I believe
type
that
of
Campbell's operates
place like that?
Yeah,
There are chicken
they are a chicken rescue organization. There's a very active one in the Philadelphia area.
Okay, but anything around here that you're aware of?
There's no need for it around here since they're illegal.
What about around Baltimore?
Around Baltimore, I'm not aware.
Okay.
Oh, actually, yes, there is. The ACPCA, I get that acronym wrong, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animal People. A friend of mine volunteers there, and he do take poultry.
Okay. Joe Fevis, followed by Mary Van Dyke.
So I have a very brief question, and I would like everybody to address the nutritional value of backyard eggs versus commercial eggs.
Yeah, I looked it up just before I came over here. I guess a refresher, I don't know. I go home to my in-laws. They've got chickens on a 1 acre place in San Juan Capistrano that allows it. And of course, my mom-in-law doesn't let us eat any of them before they're 3 days old because she says they wind up tasting like rubber. But I looked up the nutritional value, and I could not find a difference between the two online. There was no comparison, no matter how I typed that into Google. I did come up with an article that said that the average large chicken egg gives you 187 milligrams of cholesterol in your diet. They recommend the average male in the U.S. runs around 330, and female runs around 280. And so one egg per day is going to probably boost you up pretty close to having to cut back on something else. You're going to go over the limit. And since the chickens normally aren't real worried about your cholesterol level, they're going to go right on land, and you got to figure out what to do with those eggs, right?
How do I?
Talk nicely to it.
Just want to back up a couple.
It's not cooperating. I think. Can you do it from memory? Or?
Okay.
If the escape didn't.
Well, thanks for the question, Joel. I was just trying to pull up the slide that we had up earlier, but I would encourage you to take a look at it online. There is a study that we were aware of that did compare industrial scale produced eggs versus backyard hen eggs, and you see the comparison here. Basically, backyard eggs have less of the bad stuff and more of the good stuff, and meaning less cholesterol, saturated fat, more vitamin A, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin E, and beta-carotene. The study can be seen. Mother Earth News actually publicized this, but I would welcome others to take a look at what research is done, but this is the one that we were aware of. And we didn't put actually the numeric comparisons in there, but it's actually not a small difference. It was in most or all of those cases, there were very substantial differences in the quantities of those substances. Mother Earth News publicized it, and so the Google. I can send you the link if you'd like.
Well, I'd like to thank both the presenters for working overtime with our questions as a group. And I do have plenty more questions, and I'm hoping there's going to be lots of time to really discuss, hows and ifs and all the rest, far more. But I think to wrap up, I'd like to actually just take the much wider question, just set this backyard hens in the context that we've been mentioning all along, which is domestic poultry and also livestock. And in a way, it's not fair to either of you, but I would like to ask you, should the task force be evaluating poultry and livestock and bees, not just hens at this point? And given the zoning is divided primarily into residential and commercial and either non-profit or profit and community gardens, how do you see the zoning, if we do go down the route of animals, do you have a view to how the zoning should differ between different zoning areas at this point?
Okay, thanks, Mary. Good questions. On the zoning issue, the effective prohibition on backyard hens appears in the R20 residential zoning ordinance, and so that would be the ordinance that would need to be modified if we are to allow residents to keep small numbers of backyard hens. So that is, I think that would address your zoning, so it would be the R-zoned areas of Arlington that would be impacted by that modification. The first question you asked about sort of broader context, bees and other animals. As a representative of the Arlington Egg Project, Jefferson and I are here tonight to represent our position, and we don't have a position on animals beyond that. I would say my own observation, and Jefferson and I both happen to be beekeepers, or bee guardians, I think would be maybe a more accurate description of what we do. And I think that many of us in the Arlington Egg Project recognize that we are, although we are an advocate for a particular freedom, this is connected to something bigger, and we are in your hands to see how this connects with other efforts, but certainly as a backyard bee guardian and as a backyard vegetable grower, albeit not so successful this year, but I'm working on it. These things are all connected, and they're connected in a way that I think Jefferson was was quite eloquent in describing. This is how we lived historically and how many leading communities live today, is to embrace this in a very broad context, and I hope you will do that.
Good question. As he said, it's in R20. Now, in the zoning code, R20, when you get to R10, it says everything in R20 plus the following restrictions in R10, and when you get to R6, it daisy chains down to R5, which is the smallest lot size you deal in. So you're going to change something, you have to go in there and look at that and say, okay, how's this
talking about hens, are we talking about hens generically? I mean, what about partridges, capons, ducks, you know, other fowl? I mean, where are we there? Is that practical or no?
I mean, I think it's something you guys might want to look at, but I mean, personally, it's the hen issue that we're taking a look at right here.
Good point, John. I mean, absolutely. You gotta, if you're gonna tackle the bird poultry.
Well, I mean, Gallus domesticus is the species that we are talking about as an advocacy group. And I would take a reading of the zoning ordinance to determine whether that addresses species beyond Gallus domesticus or just that one. But, you know, I would say that taking this to an extreme is not helpful. Bison are not comparable to hens, and so to use an argument related to that, I think is specious. And we are talking about a small bird that has lived proximate to humans for thousands of years and is successfully raised today in urban areas with lot sizes the same or smaller than Arlington's.
Thank you. I managed to skip over Gay Mount. Gay? Any questions? Okay. Well, we've already run afoul of our time. Let me just go back to the task force. Does any member of the task force have any follow-up questions for our group? Briefly, please.
Very brief. And this is to Ed. Hey, Ed, I've seen your presentation now 3 times. It gets better every time, by the way. I mean that as a compliment. But you've been saying that you've had 1,000 signatures now for, I think, going on almost a year. Tonight I heard you say you had 1,114. There are over 220,000 people, I believe, in Arlington County. I would think that with all the speaking that you're doing and everything else, that you would get a lot more support. I mean, it's been 1,000 again for quite a while. Is there a reason for that? And the reason I ask is because everyone that I speak to in North Arlington, by and large, is against this. And I'm just wondering, where is the community outcry to change the ordinance? I'm just not sure it's there. So I'm just trying to figure out why there's still only 1,000 after so much time. I think you've been at the community fair now for a couple of years, getting signatures. So I just wanted your viewpoint on that.
Well, I mean, we're working hard to reach out to all of the community, and we'd love everybody's help in doing that. And if I could talk to every one of those 200,000 folks, I'd do it. But we're doing the best we can to reach out and to be as transparent as possible and to be advocates for a view. When I served on the Arlington School Board, I took very seriously the views of any constituent who came before me, and I think that in Arlington County, our public officials do that. They take very seriously when any resident in the community, let alone if a group of residents approaches them, whether it's one person or 50 people. In this case, we have many, many more than that who are asking for something. We are asking for a dialogue. We appreciate the fact that there's a diversity of views, which is why we think that this is a great forum. And I hope we'll keep doing that and have a conversation that tries to welcome all of the views of those 200,000 folks as best as we can get it. And we certainly, as an advocacy group, would welcome that. And that comes from you and Jim and everybody else too. I mean, we're going to be better for the conversation, but certainly we as a group are doing our best to reach out to folks.